Okay, guys, so in this video, we're going to be reviewing the meeting that you just heard. These are the faces that were in the meeting, Juuna'e and Timothy, my good friends. But yeah, I haven't been able to re-listen to the meeting since we had it a couple of weeks ago, but they have listened to it more than twice. So we just wanted to really highlight some points and just break down what we experienced now that we're a little bit away from it. So yeah, Timothy's gonna lead that.
Yep. I guess coming into the thing, so I'll just go down a list of things that I noticed that need to be, I think, addressed because we were working through so many, trying to get the whole of the presentation done and get through so many things that there's a lot of things that I think were worth stopping on that we didn't in the meeting, or that re-listening to kind of give some context. So yeah, I've got a list of things that I think are worth just discussing further that we can do. And I think the first thing, maybe before we get into anything that's truly a point, is that like listening to it the first time or being in the meeting the first time, like a lot of the defenses were things that like we didn't know or we weren't aware of, or had we been presented this information, we wouldn't have done this. But by the end of the meeting, while we bring new things up, make harder points and do different things, I don't actually know any new information that we brought to the table. Like when it comes to the lack of communication that you were giving them, there's a lot of stuff that is explained before you block them, like pretty much explicitly, that they have the context of, and they understand the severity of too. So there's a lot of things that when I listened to it the first time, I was like, ah, man, they just really weren't aware. They really didn't know. But the more I listened to it, the more I'm like, no, like later on in the video, they explicitly say they were aware of this. They read this, we saw this. So as I'm listening, I'm like, like some of the stuff that seems like it stands early doesn't stand late. So I feel like that's worth saying now on the back end of the video, because listening to it twice or the third time definitely shows some stuff that bothers me. And I think the first thing that might be worth maybe pointing out, again, I guess this is an overarching thing, is the abandonment that you said, or that they said that you had while knowing the context of the abuse. And so it seems extremely severe to say that what you're doing is abandonment, one, without context, but also even with context, like knowing what you've been through. What you're doing is both, like the only thing that it seems like you're really guilty of in the abandonment issue is not communicating. Like literally what you did is even fine by them though. They suggested it. It was just literally communication. So I feel like that's important.
Yeah, and that would be communication with them is what they're saying, because she did communicate with Chris, with her husband. So
and with you, and
yeah,
right. Yeah, I think that's important. Like in hindsight, I'm like, oh, I wish that maybe that would have been addressed first, because I didn't get there about how Chris kept badgering me with text messages, like, you know, let's talk. You know, when we made a decision, like, I'm gonna reach out to you when I'm ready.
Right.
The fact that we had that agreement and he agreed to, like, yeah, I'm gonna let you reach out, but he kept texting me back to back to back. That's why I stopped responding to him, to enforce my boundary, you know, like I said. And because I stopped responding to my husband, Chris, he then took that to them, the pastors, and was like, she abandoned me, right? So what started this was him telling the story that I abandoned him because I'm not responding to the text. But again, there's that lack of context being provided, to what led them to say she abandoned her marriage.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And actually, before we even started this video, I'm glad it's already still on my phone right now. I was looking something up just in scripture, and it's in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 5 through 7.
Where's my Bible? I'll be right back.
And I know we're going to touch on this, so I don't know if this could be a segue into that already, or we could pause and wait, but it still relates to the abandonment part. But in verse 5, it says, do not deprive each other, except perhaps by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Then come together again, so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. And then this part was huge to me in verse 6, where it says, I say this as a concession, not as a command. Like,
yeah, we'll get back there.
Yeah,
Okay.
but I mean,
let's circle back to that, but that's important.
But even on the abandonment part, it's just kind of like it says with mutual consent to kind of step away for a while. And so I think, that was a biblical thing that even the therapist suggested, with saying like to kind of giving you the consent, or the suggestion or advice to separate for your safety and for whatever the reason being. But I think because you did communicate that to your husband, Chris, it's like it was a mutual understanding and a mutual agreement. So I think, and it says for a time,
right?
It doesn't say for 2 months, for 6 days, like it's for a time. And because every situations are different, I think there's like,
but even that, there was a time, right? I was like 2 months from this date, and the text prove he's been texting me before the 2 months was over, right? And so I think this just really highlights the manipulation that's happening. Like this is how you can kind of see it, you know what I mean? Like this is where it's coming from. Because I chose to stop communicating with the reverends, now all they're getting is his side of the story. Right. But again, they were full aware of what our therapist said about him and what his challenges are in as a person. That, that doesn't make him, unfortunately, trustworthy. And I think that goes back to either Rev Rudy and Rev Chris don't get it, or they didn't research what is narcissism. What is that? Like actually dig into, okay, what does that mean? Like they just skimmed over things, you know what I'm saying? So
we can circle back to that, because I think there's other things that I think highlight that a little different, but will for sure do it. So I guess going back in order. So one of the first things that was talked about was, I guess this is coming up now. So like, what marriage vows did you actually break? And it boiled down to two things. One was, it was you separating, and then we established that like, one, that was advised by them and the counselor. And it was just the time in which you did it, which was basically you fighting longer to try to make it work the first way, which I think is important. But also, so it wasn't you separating that's considered the marriage vows, it's that you weren't communicating with them specifically, because even the time you took would have been okay had they just heard from you, apparently. So not communicating with your pastors is considered unrepentant sin.
According to them.
And it's like, where is that in scripture? Juuna'e brought that up in the thing and we didn't stay there, but that's one of the points that I think was worth talking about, is like, when you get to the point of excommunication, you're talking about absolutes. You're talking about things that you can stand on judgment day and say, the Lord has said, like, you'll love your one wife and you won't commit adultery, or, you know what I mean? Like, don't steal, don't cheat, don't like, but it's like, to make a statement of she's not communicating with us is, one, a problem, but two, that's not what they said. And I think there's an awareness that not communicating with us and saying that to the public wouldn't stand on its own. So it kind of got buried behind marriage vows. And so when you unpack it, there's not a lot there except you weren't talking to them at worst. And I don't know where that is in scripture that says you're an unrepentant biblical sin. And you know what I mean? Like that's a huge deal that we didn't.
Well, it's also because I wasn't talking to my husband.
Mm-hmm. Which you were. Well, when?
No.
Oh, you mean when you blocked him? Like after that?
No. When he kept texting me when we agreed, I'm going to reach out to you. So I
Okay.
stopped responding to him. So they're like, oh, she's abandoning you, right? So she's not talking to us. She's not talking to you. She abandoned the marriage, you know? But again, to bring it back home, it's like, no, I communicated you prior to ignoring you, right? I said, I need 2 more months. That's communication. I said what I needed.
Right.
That's what I'm going to do. You didn't like that, so you went against that. But my position doesn't change. This is what I need. This is what I need at this time. I'm sticking to that. So I did communicate. And you just didn't like the answer. So that's, again, that's him, not me. Right.
Yeah, I forget like what I wish it was coming to my mind right now, but it's like a phrase for those kind of situations where like it's not an oxymoron, but it's almost like a sudden epiphany. But there's an actual phrase for it for these kind of situations. It's basically one of those things where it's like you think something is so crazy until you get that one detail and you're just like, whoa, it completely changes the entire perspective of something. And I think man, I can't think of the word, but I think with you and Chris, it's like because of the detail that was missing about to them, the detail that was missing about you guys having this understanding and this mutual agreement, it's like, yeah, if you don't have that detail, then it seems like you not responding to him, ignoring his calls. It seems like, whoa, we fully see what this is, until it's like one little detail gets presented by saying, no, we agreed for this amount of time, or we agreed XYZ. And then it's like, oh, that should change everything, you know? And, but once
that's worth bringing
a meeting, it doesn't seem like it made a difference.
Yeah, that's worth bringing this up here too, then, because there's a underlying theme of like, we didn't make a mistake as pastors. Y'all made a mistake, or you made a mistake by not telling us as pastors. So we made it. Like, basically, it's not so much that they're defending you or Chris, but themselves that's becoming the problem. And it comes up in issues like this, where it's like, oh, you weren't communicating with us. Had we known that? And then it's like, then we never would have did what he did. And the conversation constantly shifts to, then how can we be to blame, rather than, we didn't know that. Why wouldn't we just like, hold on, did you like, were you aware? Like the amount that Chris wasn't addressed in that meeting kind of impressed me, because they asked him to be there so that there wasn't going to be a lot of crossing of stories and stuff like that. And so I would have thought there'd be more, but it doesn't seem like it's debatable. It's like, oh no, we know he's messed up. We know he's like that was kind of the take. It felt like it was in the room, is like, you know, like he spoke a few times, but nothing pertaining to like defending himself. And so I just thought that was an interesting thing, that when those kind of things get brought up, it becomes, well, we didn't know, so how can we be held accountable, rather than, oh, wow, I didn't realize that was the context. So, and that's for the things they didn't have the context for. This, a lot of these things, that's not even true for.
I feel like another reason of they're like, she's not communicating with us, it's like, they're like, where are you? Are you in a church? Like, they're concerned for me being under leadership or whatever. It's like, as you saw in the PowerPoint presentation, like I texted them that I was leaving. I texted Rev Rudy, like I communicated. So again, I want to highlight, I told them I was leaving. I didn't just vanish and not say anything. So again, like I communicated, and I did it politely. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, you can't keep accusing me of not communicating. Like I told you what I was going to do. And
I think their word is updating. I think that's what they
that's
mean.
what it is. Yeah. It's like, no, I removed, you don't have that privilege into my life anymore. Like you did not handle that correctly. I'm not going to, anybody should not let someone in their inner council that's not carrying their story with care. Like you don't get that privilege anymore, you know? And I think that there's a lot of that at the heart of it. You know, it's like, oh, she's not letting us handle her heart anymore. And it's like, well,
Yeah,
Why
like
would
had you not
I?
had you not explicitly said that, it's like, ah man, like the ideal way is for her to, have a letter of recommendation to go to a different church for us to be a community. But it's like you're assuming like one, like you have to do like that's the ideal way, but that doesn't say that any other way to do it is sin, to just
Mhm.
politely remove yourself because you don't have a new church you're going to, but the one you're presently at isn't meeting needs or isn't something you can trust. It's like there's no biblical mandate for how you
Yeah.
leave a body of people that you feel like aren't like adequately representing you. So yeah, like again, we're down to preference rather than sin. And we're talking about excommunication, which has to be about undeniable, unrepentant sin. So
Yeah. And I
yeah,
feel
like
like that
that's
still at the same time has absolutely nothing to do with the accusations, against Mel. Like, however you left, even if you like yelled at everybody before you walked out of the doors and left, you know what I mean? It's like that still does not connect to what they were accusing you of doing. Like, like those are
Mhm.
two completely different topics. So,
yeah.
I also like wanted to bring up how the scriptures were used to, the sexual immorality thing, and like how that wasn't clarified. Like, oh, I'm saying these scriptures to let the church know that it's biblical to excommunicate, as opposed to these verses apply to Meli's sin, right? That wasn't clear.
yeah.
Yeah.
And which aided in them painting me as like this great sinner who fell away, right?
Right.
I think that was very important, that they dropped the ball on that. If that wasn't their intention, they dropped the ball on that, and they need to clear that up.
Yeah.
You
Because
know,
it can't be assumed that, because I mean, that was the defense. It's like, oh, if it was about sexual immorality, then we would have said this. And it's like, I get what you would have said, but there's also the fact that people hear different things. And when you don't clarify, especially on a stage that big, like as much as there's a truth in the fact that it's like, we didn't want to tell all their business, well, it's like the things you omit leave room for imagination too. And so when
Right.
you use the verse of the man that was sleeping with his stepmother, like, and you say that she abandoned her marriage vows,
what are
and then
people
you
going to
don't do anything
conclude?
else, it's like, okay, maybe some people are like, oh, he didn't say it explicitly, but it's like you got to
You're
say what stuff
planting
isn't.
seeds.
Right.
Yeah, like you do have a due
Exactly.
diligence. If you're not going to tell the whole story, then you do need to take the time to say what it isn't too.
And that's with anything, like
Right.
whether it's your intention or not, right? If it's your intention to hurt somebody or not, the fact is you still did damage. And that's what true, like, taking accountability and responsibility is. Like, you say, I didn't mean to, but I see how it did that, and I need to fix that, right?
Yeah.
So if they're saying like, oh, that wasn't our intention, so let's move on, like, that's not cool.
Hmm.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the next thing is the sex. So I don't even think we addressed that in the meeting. Like that was
Also,
that
We
threw
couldn't,
people
yeah,
off
we
guard so
couldn't.
much. But basically, one of the reasons you had abandoned your marriage vows is because your body isn't your own, and y'all should be having sex. Essentially, the verse Juuna'e just used is the context that I think that gets pulled from,
mm-hmm.
where you're basically, if at anything you're separating for a time, but you come back together. And I never caught that at the end. This is a concession, not a command. So we're almost already wiping that off the board because Paul himself
It's right.
makes the distinction between command, which is law or obedience, and suggestion, which is advisable. And we're not talking about sin. So,
Right. Like
yeah.
everything is literally in the favor of how things went down, like to the point that you just made, like Paul himself saying it's not a command, but then also the mutual agreement. It's like, well, yeah, like, so it says, do not deprive each other except perhaps by mutual consent and for a time. That's exactly what your situation was. So it's like, even within the borders of Paul's advice, it was being followed. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's
And on a level of mutual consent, like mutual being two, not
Right.
three, not pastor, not, you know, like it's cool if you use
Right.
that too. Multitude of
right.
counsel, there's wisdom, but if you don't, you're not in, I don't see where it says
Insane.
you're in sin. You know what I mean? It's like, it's cool to
Exactly.
let people in on your marriage. So that, you know what I mean? Like that's healthy. But if you don't want to let them in, if you don't want to let whatever, it's like, okay. Like,
No, and that I think
I'm not good.
that right there was, I think, further shown later in the meeting when it was kind of towards the end, when they were we were kind of all talking about like what were they saying about like husband Chris having to wait on Mel. And I think it was Rev Rudy that made a comment and was just like, well, how long is he supposed to wait? And then, you know, we kind of gave a defense on like, you know, the timing and all that. And then he said something along the lines of like, oh, that like we're not gonna
Gonna
do,
wait forever.
we are not going to
Yeah.
wait that long,
Like,
It's
you
like, who
know?
are you?
Yeah. And it's
Like,
like, well, you aren't husband Chris, you know,
mhm.
like you're not him. And if this was a mutual agreement, now if it's not a mutual agreement, then that was a whole different thing, but it
Mhm.
was. And I think when it comes to even Paul giving this kind of advice, it's like this is coming from Paul's wisdom and his authority to give this advice and suggestion the same way that the therapist gave the advice and suggestion for you guys to do this thing. So even
right.
if husband Chris even decided to not follow through with this mutual separation, it was being advised. It's almost like Paul giving Timothy, you know, or giving the Corinthians this advice, and then the person that's in the wrong, and Paul's even saying like, you guys need to separate, as if that person was like, no, I don't want to agree to that. You know, it's like,
Mhm.
but this is coming, you know, from someone who's credible, like someone that is giving wise counsel. So I feel like all that to say, I feel like you were following wise counsel, and you and Chris agreed to follow the wise counsel. And then he was, you know, kind of breaking that wise
Boundaries.
counsel.
I think even like in the context of that particular passage of scripture, like, right, I know whenever I've read it in the past, it's like for prayer and, you know, fasting, like your direct relationship to God, you know,
Okay.
keeping that, honing that one-on-one, you know, even though you're married and you're no longer,
Yeah.
you know, you're
Setting
the
the
single
peace.
person, right? But it is important to still have that single, like you and God, right?
Exactly.
So I think that's the context of that. But I see what you're doing with like the whole, like our separation, right? Because there's actually a conflict happening. So that's what kind of makes it different. But even with that being said, like both Rev Rudy and Rev Chris knew that sex was a big issue in our marriage. They knew that Chris was manipulating me in the bedroom. You know, they knew like these pretty horrible facts, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And for them to say, you need to be having sex with him. Like, you guys couldn't see it, but I started to cry when he said that, because it felt like I got slapped in the face. It was like, you know what I've been through. I confided in you. I
Right.
told you how many times he manipulated me about sex, and you guys counseled us through that.
Mhm.
And then you're going to sit here and tell me you need to get back in the bed with him? Like, that was like, oh my gosh, like I couldn't believe that I heard that. And it's like, why am I so shocked? You know, at the same time, it's like, but
Yeah.
it like took the breath out of me. I was just like, you are fully aware. And yet it's just more important that he gets his sex. How does that make sense? How is that loving? How is that taking account my situation? Like,
Right.
it's like you threw it out of your brain. It's like you threw it away.
Right.
And the email proves too that they know, because the therapist said sex is a traumatic, difficult issue. You know, it says something like that. You guys need to stop having sex for now, you know? So even because the therapist knows the dynamics of that, right? So it's like, there's no excuse. You knew, and you keep like hurting me. Like, why? Where is this coming from?
Yeah.
Right.
It makes no sense.
This might be, this was later, but I think this is because you said that it's worth bringing up now because, so I've never heard this happen before when Rev Rudy talks about the whole, his breath smells like SH, like, so, because I do want you to explain the act, not maybe full detail,
We'll touch on
but
it.
like, yeah. So the thing that I've never heard happen before that like bothered me is like, I've heard people that are, I've heard like really passionate Christians that won't say cuss words. And so when someone else cusses, in order to keep the context, they'll spell it out. They'll say something like that. I've heard Christians who don't care. So they'll just repeat exactly what you said. I've never heard someone upgrade the severity of the language used by the person. Like if someone says, dang, I stubbed my darn toe. And then they spin around and say, man, like you were just so upset the other day. You said you stubbed your effing toe. And it's like,
no,
why
I didn't.
you, yeah, it's like,
right, don't do that.
So it's like, for one, that's really important. But two, I remember the context of that coming up kind of in Chris's defense of like, yeah, he's a narcissist. Yeah, you communicated. Yeah, all of this evidence is overwhelming, but I've seen you emasculate and destroy his name too. And it's like, whatever had to come next had to be something worthy of the statement. And it's like he boosted.
You had to, yeah.
And like that bothered me. Like when
it's dishonest.
Especially when we talked about it afterwards. So like I want you to give sort of, because in the interview or in the like the audio, meeting, you kind of like were off balance by it. You were like, you went there, like, but I feel like it might be worth actually giving some context to that so that like someone else listening doesn't think like, well, she didn't cuss, but she still emasculated him. And you know, like, I don't know, that might be worth saying, at least on a public level. I don't know too much, but yeah.
Just to go back to what you were saying, like the fact that he said, I said a cuss word, like, again, that's disingenuous. Like you are making me sound worse than I am, right? Which goes back to the whole excommunication speech in itself. Like that's why I had so many problems with it, because they were like painting me as worse than what I was actually doing. And that's another example when him saying, you said his breath smells like shh. You know, like, no, I did not say that. I never said that.
Right.
And I said that, right, in the meeting. I was like, I never said that.
Yeah, you definitely closed that door.
And he was like, and then he agreed, right? He was like, yeah, you didn't say that. But it was just like, then why did you say that?
Right.
You
Yeah.
know?
Why?
Like,
that happens a few times.
And I think that's very important to be like, why are you being so loose? Like what
with these
as a pastor,
topics,
first of all, but like it's uncalled for.
I feel like that situation, as well as like Timothy just said, like many times that kind of happened, you know, in the meeting, I think it's kind of a reflection of and we've talked about this before, but I think it's kind of a reflection of like the underlying heart behind all of this. Because like if you really care about somebody and you really love somebody and you really genuinely want to see restoration and you genuinely want this person to be okay, and you're thinking about being sensitive and cautious with this person and gentle and delicate, like you're not going to do something like that. You're not going to be like, because you said, you know, like that's more like fighting words. That's more like I'm irritated. Like what's underlying that verbiage, I think, is something just like irritating, or I want to see this person like fail, or I want to see this person kind of like be seen for who I think they really are. So I'm gonna say, oh, you said, you know, this, you know, whatever comment that he made. Like it just, there was no love or compassion or gentleness like behind a lot of the things that they communicated.
Yeah, I know, like, is this okay? First of all, that's him saying that I said his breath smells like shh is a lie. Like, let's call it what it is, a lie.
Right.
It is slander.
Yeah.
Right? That's what it is.
And I think, so to give them, I don't want to accuse them of the wrong thing though, because I don't think at the bottom of this, and I'm not God, so I can't read the heart, but I see more. So I see less of let's make Mel out to be the worst person possible. And in that exact instant, it seemed more like there is so much evidence for why we shouldn't have excommunicated or why we did what we did, or how it's like, let's bring this back to both of y'all are messy. Chris has issues, you have issues. I've watched you slander him. I've watched him abuse you, or not abuse, but manipulate and do this. And I've seen it. And we're just like the poor pastors in the crossfire. Like he was trying to get back to a sense of we are regulating a messy situation, but we're okay. Like that seems to be the overarching theme that's happening, is keeping their credibility in place, not explicitly that they hate you, but I think
I would definitely say there was still some bias there though, because I think that in the meeting that I feel like it leaned in Mel's favor over husband Chris. If anything, their sympathy went, if it had to lean away, it leaned towards husband Chris. Like, I don't think they showed any compassion towards Mel kind of at any point.
But I think that's because of where they're standing right now, is why I say that. Like, because they have chosen Chris lately and excommunicated Mel, like the bias is coming from the fact that, like, I think in my own mind that they'd be just as willing had they excommunicated Chris and sided with Mel.
Because of the
Chris
choice they made.
It's them, not the male dominance. And this should, like, there is a lot of male stuff happening, but I don't think I'd credit that one to it. I think that's more just they happen to choose that side, which is why he says, like, I felt like an idiot for defending you and everything else. It's because he's constantly basically upset at whatever shows his error.
Like, that makes sense. Yeah.
But again, like, this is another thing that's not that's just what I'm observing. Like, when I was listening, that wasn't like a absolute. So
and I think it's important to just like highlight again that in order to defend his position, Rev Rudy, he had to lie to do that.
Yeah. But the purpose of excommunication is to get rid of somebody who is in unrepentant sin and does not want to leave the church. So when we're talking about the man that slept with he's still sitting there. The person that's divisive in the church, he's still in the church. The person that you approach and you bring before the church, and after that have nothing to do with, like, you are getting rid of somebody who is not willingly ridding themselves, which means if it's understood that you communicated that I'm leaving, there's no need for excommunication, because the whole purpose is to not hurt the body by indulging someone in their sin and keeping them there while still trying to hold the body to growth and things like that.
So worshiping together.
Yeah, but if you removed yourself, then it's like, oh, she left. Like that literally solves the problem. Yeah, the only reason you would, it's almost like they need to have a status on all the people that have crossed through their church, when it's like, no, like, keep track of your members, and people who leave, like, they left. So especially with the context that you left in, but yeah, that's not biblical to me, just because the purpose of excommunication also, and I wish I had said that earlier, but yeah, it's to get rid of people who aren't trying to leave but are still in unrepentant sin, that are saying, I'm gonna live my lifestyle in here, and that's literally not what's happening. I don't know if anybody
because ironically, it's like that's the position of my husband. Like, he's the one in unrepentant sin. And as I said in the PowerPoint, like, I couldn't continue to go worship the Lord knowing my husband is in unrepentant sin. Like, that became very uncomfortable for me, you know? So I removed myself. And all along, he's chilling, like, and not being confronted to grow, like, to not.
That makes sense.
I think that's important. This is a good place to highlight too, that, like, I feel like I'm not being heard, that even though my husband is saying, like, I quit seminary,
I was just about to,
I'm committing to discipline under Rev Rudy and Rev Chris, whatever that means. I still didn't get a clear, like, oh, this is what we're doing to keep Chris you know, to grow. Like no one broke that down to me. So I don't even know what the discipline was. But the point was I was trying to make even in that meeting was like, he can be doing all the things telling you like, hey, I realized this and I'm doing this now. But like, I'm the one that goes home to him every day. His behavior is he's not changing, right? Anybody can say like, you know, they're doing something. Your words don't mean anything. Like, and as Christians, we know that. Like, what do your actions say about what your words say? Right. And so it's like, why is that not landing? Like,
I think that is why though, like the advice from the professional in the room, the therapist, was it kind of like spoke for itself and shown itself to be like the wisest advice in the room, because it's like you said, I wasn't really sure what we were working on or doing. And like, yeah, he's quitting seminary and, you know, getting under discipline with Rev Rudy and Rev Chris, but it's like, you're saying nothing's changing at home. Of course, that's why the therapist, the professional is, they know that it's a process. They know, they're familiar with narcissism. You know, they know things aren't going to change overnight. They know that these people are manipulators. They know, like, the therapist was fully aware of everything and educated, which is why the advice that the therapist gave you guys to separate, you know, and gave you practical things to work on, like you setting your boundaries and stuff like that. The therapist knows this is the kind of stuff that needs to happen if we want to really see action and results and change. So I think it's just funny that the therapist's emails and advice kind of got pushed to the side and kind of ignored in a sense. And Rev Rudy and Rev Chris, decided to do what they wanted to do, you know?
Right. And that, again, I kept trying to highlight too, that Rev Rudy and Rev Chris told me and my husband, Chris, in previous counseling, we're not the experts. You know, we want you guys to get a therapist. We can come alongside and pray for you, but like, we're not they admitted we're not equipped to deal with this.
Yeah.
You know, but like you're saying, it's like coming back to like, but what we want trumps the success of this situation.
Right.
I know, like, you knew we needed outside help, someone who's a professional. So yeah, I'm glad that you said that, because it's like showing the circular.
Yeah, it's like, did you guys really mean that, or did it just?
Because now that we have someone speaking against my husband, right?
Yeah.
And not me.
Yeah.
Oh,
I didn't have this here, but I need this needs to happen, because we did the marriage vows, we did church. And then this bothered me because the order they did it in is the only grounds for the last statement, which is like, you abandoned your faith in Christ. And we say it in the interview. It's just like, is that a deduction of the other two things? Or do you have a reason to think, you know? And so it's like, so far it's like, abandoning your faith in Christ. You never said that. That never happened. And then she didn't reply. Like, so basically you leaving their church and not being a part of another church immediately is sin. Yeah.
Well, I have a comment to make on that. Like, it's like, I almost want to say, like, to their benefit. Like, and I use this loosely, but I think, Mel, the way that you worded the message that you sent to Rudy, something about like, I'm done with the, I don't know if it was organized religion or church system.
Church system, yeah.
Because my point is to say, like, to their credit or benefit, I can see how that can be interpreted if you just look at that text message alone as, oh, this person is done with the church, the system of the church. Like, they don't want nothing to do with the church, not our church, but the church system, period. But the reason why, so yeah, that's why I said to their benefit. Okay, if they want to interpret it like that, then fine. But at the same time, it still does no good. And I still don't buy it, because it's not like they're only getting this single text message alone in isolation of the context of what's been going on, you know, because they have been fully aware of everything. It's like, this just shows, if they did genuinely interpret it as that, let's just say, it still shows that they have not been either paying attention or lacked discernment or whatever you want to say when it comes to you and your husband Chris's situation. Because if they couldn't connect two and two together to see why you would make that decision, being in pain, wanting to separate and to get away, you know what I mean? Because of everything you've been keeping them updated on, then I feel like that's still a problem, because I feel like that's kind of like a lack of discernment, you know, which I guess you can't fully fault them with that. But at the same time, you can choose, like you did, to walk away from counsel that does not have that ability to discern those kind of things. You know, it's like, it's almost one of them things where it's like, man, like you weren't aware of something, or you didn't have the discernment to navigate that situation, or to notice that I needed help when I was depressed and crying. Like you thought maybe I was crying because a sad movie was on the screen. You didn't think I've been complaining to you about depression for months and I'm breaking down crying, but because there's a sad scene on at the moment, you think I'm crying behind the movie. Like, you know what I mean? Like you didn't ask me what's wrong, or it's like, you know, thank you, but I can't trust that you're going to be able to handle me with the level of like care and discernment that I need when it comes to who I let surround me with counsel. And I think that you even said that earlier in this video, like you chose to walk away from their counsel, and that they no longer had that, I guess, like privilege or access to you, which I think is a wise move, you know?
Yeah. Is there anything else? I had another thought.
Yeah, I think even in the text itself to Rev Rudy about, you know, I said something like, at this point in my life, I don't plan on going back to the church system, you know,
right?
Something like that. And I think, just to talk about the church for a second, like that's one of the things that we need to grow in, is understanding that church hurt is real, you know, and so many people go through it, whether it's abuse or, you know, so many different subjects, to where sometimes people need to take a step back and really figure out what's safe for them, you know what I mean? And like, just being triggered. I think a lot of Christians do get triggered, like, oh, they're not going to church, they're not really a Christian. But it's like, it's not black and white.
Exactly.
You know, like human beings are complex. We're still sinners, you know, there's a lot of pain that goes, you know what I mean? So it's just like, to take jumps and broad stroke things is where we mess up so much, you know, and we're not showing God's grace, allowing healing time, right? Because again, everybody's situation is different. And, you know, we live in a fallen world, you know, and it's sad that like the church isn't always a safe place, you know, and that's just the reality of it. So I just think
that actually, I guess because other people are listening to this might be worth making that distinction, because I don't know, I'm realizing how big a thing that is now. But so one, there's a difference between church and service. Like when people say I haven't been to church, they mean service,
right?
Like, but whether I've been around believers or not is a totally different question. And so that's one thing that I think we need to make sure we're distinguishing. And then the other is like, because I was having a conversation with somebody, and it was just the wisdom behind, like, if I get hurt by a girl, she cheats on me, she does some like seriously jacked up stuff, and I'm like, man, I'm done with women, all girls are fake, I'm sick of it, and I'm talking to whoever about it. It's like they'd listen to that and think, you know, he didn't just become gay or something, like he's still, but it's like, what would actually be bad for you after going through that is immediately getting in another relationship without healing from the first one. Because then the first one, like the first one wears all the bandages. So the new church or the new relationship can't make any mistakes that the first one made, because you're too hurt to basically feel the damage. And so now, you know, I'm texting the next girl, like, where are you at? You didn't call me today. And it's like, because the last girl that didn't call me on Tuesday cheated on Tuesday. So now I'm checking on Tuesday. And she's like, I'm with my parents. And it's like, sure you, like, because I never healed, I don't give the next place an honest chance to love, you know? And so in the same way, I think there's a wisdom in joining a church that, one, takes some time to just be around the people you trust that are believers. Like, take some time to like maybe eventually get involved, like get connected, do something, like, and establish things. But it's like to think like, dang, like if you're not jumping from church to church to church, because the ideal situation is you're going to a healthy church, you get married and you move, and now you're going from a healthy church to a healthy church. But it's like, what if the church is the issue? What if that did damage? What if that had problems? Like,
Right.
I know what the perfect world scenario is, but that's not what we're dealing with here. So the fact that like there wasn't any room for you to navigate that outside of like, get over your feelings, get over your emotions, like, and just basically be robotic, to the point where it was suggested not to even go to a big church that has no chance of knowing you and just sit there on Sunday so that whatever they say can wash over you. Like, there's something almost magical, not spiritual, but magical, I think people have about the pulpit, that like, if you're just in the proximity of someone preaching, you'll be okay. And that's not true. Like, it's not true for a huge amount of people. And the fact that we're defaulting to that leaves a lot of people falling through the cracks of the church. So that's just worth saying, because I think that is where they're coming from, but it's not really thought through what the church is, what service is, and what church hurt actually does. Like, that takes actual thought. Like, until you're the person that falls through the cracks, it's really hard to relate with it though. So
and I feel like there's more of a theme and teaching biblically of being cautious, and being slow to do things than it is to be impulsive or to just move without thinking and waiting. Like, I think patience is more biblical. Like, proceeding with caution is more biblical, even from like just quick scriptures I can think of that come to my mind about like where it says something about like, don't believe like every spirit, like to test every spirit or something like that. Or just the fact that there are wolves in sheep's clothing, the fact that that is a reality. Like, you can't, if you act fast, you won't be able to tell if it's a sheep or not, or if it's a wolf. You got to observe and look like, oh no, I see some fur sticking out, that's a wolf nose, or nope, that's not. But you got to take your time, like, to be able to observe and to process and think. And then just the many scriptures that talk about like the church period, like, or believers, where it's like people who are proclaiming to be Christian but deny me by the way they live, like this person is a liar, or this person is not, the Spirit of God is not in them. And it's like, but you can't know that right away. Like, it does take time. So I feel like that is just a theme that we see across, the Bible, you know what I mean? Rather than jumping into something or just get connected, get, and it's like, get up under
spiritually.
That's so good.
Like, we do that with, I mean, Jesus says, consider the cost. Like, there's a lot, even with the most important decision you'll ever make in your life, that it says, it's like, it's true, just jump in it because it's saving your soul. Jesus doesn't even say to do that in the context of your soul. So it's like, there is a sense of like, check the water, check the grounds, like, and even they admit to it. Like, Rev Chris in the interview or the audio is like, and there's a chance that you might run into another bad church, but you just got to keep going, And it's like, that's not something, we do that with Christianity a lot. We become impractical with it. Like, that's not something you advise someone to do in a relationship. Like, I know that last guy was a jerk, but just, you'll find the right one, just keep plowing through them. Like, who says that? It's wise. Like, but it's like, when it comes to church, it's like, nah, just get in there. You find out it's heresy, just try the next one. If you find out that's bad. And it's like, you're talking from a process. And so, and it's like, and it's like, one, you're not considering how much of that you've already done, but you're also not considering how much damage that does, to the point that it's like, no, like, you'll become toxic to the church. Like, you'll find enough bad churches, if you consistently go, that you'll decide the church as a whole is wicked and I'm gonna just do me. And that's bad. But to step back and say, I'm in a bad, like, there's a lot of people in that place, but that's not where you're at. You're just saying, like, I've been through some stuff, and I'm not about to pretend like I haven't, so that y'all can essentially think I'm safe, because that's what it is. It's
I think that's like, that super highlights I guess maybe the unconscious confusion of what the definition of the church is, right? You guys comparing it to like relationship, like a boyfriend, girlfriend, or husband, wife, or whatever, because the church is relationship. So it's the same thing. It's not about the building, you know, like Juuna'e always says, like it's relationship. So when a relationship breaks, like there's a healing process.
Exactly.
It's like where this is not a religious thing, like, you know, it's a relationship that broke.
Right.
Yeah. In their defense, I will say that they don't think they're a source of your church hurt. So they're wondering why, basically, if this is a healthy church, why can't you make a healthy transition? When in reality, like, no, like just because you're not aware doesn't mean this didn't happen.
It didn't happen,
you know?
right?
And so like the reality of the situation and the issue is, I think in their defense, like I can get that part of it, but everything else, it's still rough.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is actually here. This is where we start to get into just the kind of the wild stuff. So quoting Rev Chris, and again, there is no new information that's been presented. So what he says here should have been allowed prior, but we're just discussing it now. But he says that based on the emails and everything that they know has been going on, you have biblical grounds for divorce. So knowing that you have biblical grounds to leave the marriage entirely, and that apparently wouldn't be considered breaking your marriage vows, how does doing a lesser thing, like trying to make the marriage work or separating for a time to see if you can heal, if they knew that, why does that give the context to basically, yeah, you're abandoning your marriage vows if you leave the house, try to get safety and try to figure things out. But if you had divorced him, you'd have been fine. Like that, I don't understand the logic of that, then that's a real problem. Like that those two sentences can exist at the same time. I wish I could defend it, I really do, but I don't know how that's even possible.
I think that just sounded good in the moment. I think that, and obviously I'm not a mind reader, so I don't know what they were thinking fully, but I feel like that was almost probably said in the meeting in order to show like, no, we get it. You know, if you're being abused, if you're going through this, if this is the situation, then yeah, of course, you know, and it's like, you know, of course you have grounds for divorce, or of course, and it's like, okay, like that sounds good, you know, it's like, but if that would have really happened though, if you really would have went through with the divorce at the time, or if you really would have, you know, I just kind of wonder how that would have played out. But at the same time, to emphasize the point, I think like, yeah, if they're trying to say like, yeah, you could have gotten a divorce, but yeah, you are trying to do, like Timothy said, something less like work on my marriage, you know, because one thing that Rev Chris did say in the meeting was like, he said something along the lines of, you know, I agree. We did. The therapist told you to separate. And then we said, yeah, you probably should do that. And he was like, but you just stayed. You didn't even want to leave. And it's like, you're saying that like that's a bad thing. Like I actually tried to stay and work on my marriage. And now because he wasn't changing at home and things were not getting better, now I decided to leave. And now he had a problem with that. And it's like, what? So yeah, I think it's just, it don't make sense to me. It's pretty confusing.
But as you saw in the video with Rev Chris's DMs, he kept, you know, kind of mocking me for not leaving or not calling the cops. And again, that's a lack of education on abuse. Right. And you know that, do you know it takes 7 times for a woman being abused to leave? Like statistically, it takes up to 7 times. Because of the trauma bonding and various factors, you know, level of safety. Like it's not just, I'm gonna get up and leave. Like that's just not how it goes down. And so I think that just highlights the lack of education and wanting to seem like he's an authority in this area.
Yeah.
It's like you are speaking out of line and to shame me for not leaving right away. I was unemployed on top of that, right? So I had to get my stuff together. Like I can't, you know, it's just like, it's not that simple. And I think I said that it's not that simple. And it's like, you're not exercising empathy or sympathy. You're not like looking at it from my perspective.
Right.
That I couldn't just up and leave.
Yeah.
Right.
And a lot of women can't.
Yeah. So I'm gonna say this because I wasn't in that video, but like, I don't care if we found out you was a stripper. Like, he was out of line for what he said, how he said it. Like that entire text message thread, like, no, that was frustrating. We didn't get to that in the meeting, but I am very curious how that gets defended, because there's like, it's like in other ways, there's a certain point where I'm like, there's a certain amount of grace that certain people have over others. Some people are really empathetic, some people aren't. But like, then there's the other end of the spectrum with this disrespect, which is ungodliness, which is unholy. That's what we're dealing with. Not like, oh, how much of a capacity does he have? But like,
It was
where does he get off saying, yeah, like that was a problem. So yeah, that's going, y'all got that video, but basically there's a point in the video where Rev Chris is like, you know, she stops talking to us, so we have no choice but to assume that he was telling the truth. And Juuna'e's response to that is like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And he's like, don't, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like it turns into something. And it's like, part of me, the like empathetic part of me wants to like credit that to just the heat of the moment, frustration. But I didn't realize how much we were cut off in the video, like while we were talking. Like for like, we didn't get through the entire presentation, but we didn't even get through a lot of stuff because like so much stuff, and it doesn't really show visually because it's audio, but like there's just a lot of times where we're trying to speak and then they just kind of trump it with a self-defending, what were we supposed to do? How could we possibly know? And it's like, I don't like, there's a few times where it's like, I'm like mid-speech and it's just like, yeah, they just kind of cut it off. So like, there's a frustration to me, not in, they should have had a better conversation, they should have been kinder, but it's like, for us to be trying to restore somebody, there wasn't a ton of listening happening. And if there's not a ton of listening happening, then I can understand why you felt like I should probably stop talking to them. Like just on principle, like that matters. Like, I don't like making points that aren't explicitly biblical, but it's one of those times where it's like, this is a complex situation, but it seemed like the more complicated it got, the more they just kind of were like, this is messy, this is whatever.
No, I would say,
and it's like, yo, like,
I would say that that is biblical, but I mean, it might not be like a command or of the law or something.
Proverbs.
That's Proverbs. That's a wise proverb, like a saying that, you know, is suggested, like that should be lived by. You know, it's a wise advice, because there's many proverbs that say like a foolish man just wants to hear himself speak, you know, or, you know, a person that doesn't really like hear both sides of a story before making a decision, you know, coming to a conclusion. Like there are a lot of wise principles, to live by, that I think are like
slow to speak, quick to listen. Sorry, just wanted to add.
No, that too.
As I interrupt you.
And then what you said, slow to speak.
slow to speak.
Don't cut people off, you know. No, but no, that's a good one though. So anyways, I just wanted to make that little side comment, like in which Proverbs is in the Bible, like it's biblical. So it's like,
yeah, that's true. And then, so this, I think some of these are just side notes. So again, we said this, but I think it's important because it sounded like you were at fault for calling it domestic violence on social media and not realizing that people would think you were getting beat up. And it's like, that's not like the definition of domestic violence is any type of violence that's happening in the home. Like the fact that people aren't educated isn't your fault. And it's like, and if you're at the mercy of communicating on the level of people's education, how in the world will this ever get solved? Like that's extremely dangerous to me as a man to think, so long as I don't show physical evidence that I'm not loving my wife, there is absolutely no repercussions. I can do whatever I want. Like that's scary to me, because that's what it's starting to get to, is they can't see it. Therefore, we have to wonder if it's happening. Not, I can't see it, let's work on how we're going to get to a problem solved solution. Or if we can't,
Right.
Let's get to a professional. And if we do that, let's follow their advice because we've already established we're not qualified. And even if you got offended enough, because I didn't like this. A friend of mine said this too, but like because they brought up a lot that like you signed up, you signed the dotted line to be under their pastor and under the accountability of their church. But like, it's important to me as a man, and I feel like as a pastor, like, not that I'm a pastor, but I feel like it would be important as a pastor to also know what I signed up for. Like, they also signed up to be shepherds. And it's like, and my friend says, to quote him, who is a pastor, but he's like that's something you sign up for. And if you can't handle like the biting of the sheep, like you need to question whether you, because it's like, I don't know a pastor who hasn't dealt in some of these ways. And so it's like, honestly, it's like, if you can't deal with people in pain, if you being right is going to like, there's certain qualifications a pastor has too. And it's like, that's important, you know, because, and so I don't know, like some of that matters to me because it seemed like there was a lot of accountability on your end to stand before them and not a lot of accountability on their end to be there for you. And so, yeah, like that bothers me. That's not a, yeah,
right. And that like, I just want to say real quick too, that like within the community of people that have survived abuse, like the statistics, I can't say statistics. The statistics show that only 2% of people lie about being abused. It's very uncommon. Like people don't want to disclose that they're being abused for a number of reasons. It makes you look weak. It's embarrassing. You know, you want to protect your abuser, like so many things. So it's interesting and frustrating for us because it's like, you immediately don't want to believe us, but it's 2% of people lie. So like, and if you're not educated on that, you are adding to our pain. You are adding to what we're already suffering.
But that's almost creating a false defense for them because two reasons. One is, as a pastor, you're hearing two stories and you're like, okay, this could be 50-50. 2% of people lie. Maybe it's the truth. I don't know from here. I need to see. But all of that gets erased when a therapist comes behind this. So we're no longer dealing with percentages now. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to give them the out.
But no, I think it highlights like the lack of education. And like you said, we're dealing with people, right? The church is people, relationships, marriages. Like if leaders aren't being educated on one of the main things they're getting come to for counsel,
right? Domestic.
You don't want to educate yourself, you're not going to be helpful. You're going to be harmful. And I think that's important to highlight too, is like, you have to start with wanting to help in the real way.
Yeah. And I think,
go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say like, that's something I don't want to say I can't fault them for because I don't know how their church structure is set up, that like there's marriages, there's abuse, there's singleness, there's ministry itself and being dedicated to God's word, there's homelessness, like there's a lot of things. And so I could see how like they might not be able to specifically handle this really important issue, but it's like, so they deferred to someone who is though. You know what I mean? Like, I get that you can't be educated in all things on a level that's, you know what I mean? Like, that's a master's degree. Like, but but at the same time, it's like, so you entrusted it to someone else and they gave you their answer. So now, unless you're willing to go get educated, I don't know what we're talking about anymore. You know what I mean? Because that is now the superseding authority on abuse, unless somebody sat down and got a master's degree between y'all's marriage. Like, or go talk to them. You know what I mean? It's not like they couldn't have communicated with the therapist. So there's a lot of stuff that I feel like wasn't done.
I think there were two instances in the meeting where pushback was shown like little hints of pushback when it comes to what the therapist said. And I would probably say like hints of maybe pride, where to me, it kind of threw me aback, like, why would you make that comment? Like one of them was when I think it was Rev Chris made a comment and said something like, see, I do have either some education on something, or remember he said something along those lines.
Like, I know more than you think.
Yeah, kind of, where it was just like, okay, but yet 10 seconds ago, you were saying that emotional abuse or narcissist abuse, whatever, mental abuse or whatever is not domestic violence. So it's like, this just came out of your mouth in this meeting today, and then it was another comment that they made where it was something about the therapist, or I think they said something about, after we had just talked about all that, Rev Chris made a comment and said something about it not being considered abuse again. Like he said something along those lines where it was like, oh, like, well, that's not domestic violence or something. And I remember being like, we just talked about this, where it was like, and I said, and the therapist said this, like, do we need to go over it? It was almost like, why is there such this resistance and this need to try to diagnose the situation yourself and use your own understanding when you have someone, and the therapist was a Christian, right? Like,
right.
Even if,
where it's like you have someone else in the body that we just said, you might not be fully equipped and qualified or educated on something, but this person is. And now that they're making their diagnosis, or they're giving their suggestion or advice, you're trying to gain the control back to say, well, but it ain't though. It ain't domestic.
That's the problem. I think that's the problem. It's like, I even said that too. Like, I understand society as a whole automatically thinks like domestic violence is getting hit, right? And that's because, people like me are raising awareness, because people really don't know that.
Yeah.
But just like anything you learn in life, you have to be willing to learn it, right? Like if you want to hold on to your old definition or your a partial definition, you're choosing to be ignorant, right? It's like, no, I want to believe what I used to believe, even though I'm getting the facts from the official domestic violence website and this therapist. Like, no, domestic violence means this, not what this is what it means. Right. Like it doesn't, you can think it means that if you want, but no, it means this. And that's the problem. And that's why there needs to be more awareness.
Yeah.
And I feel like at the end of the day, it's like your goal, and which is our goal, was to really get you to safety, you know what I mean? And to make sure you're good, and safe, and to clear your name based off what they said. I think that what our goal is not is to kind of take that responsibility as being Rev Rudy and Rev Chris's teacher and trying to really get them to see this. I think, we had the meeting to have the conversation, but I think that at the end of the day, it's not our job, to try to really get them to see this. Like, we planted the seeds, we had the conversation, everything was exchanged. And I think if they still don't get it, you are still the main priority, your safety and your mental health, your spiritual health, like all of that. And so I think that's why us having this conversation publicly on this video, I think is, just what needed to be done, because whether or not Rev Chris and Rev Rudy understand yet, they might get it in time. But regardless, I think that because the viewers, are going to hear the whole story, I think that's what matters most, is that the truth is just out there, kind of like that scripture about you throw the farmer throws the seeds, and then just whatever kind of takes place, like happens, where it's just kind of like, okay, like I think that's what we're doing here. And that's satisfying,
the last thing I have on here. Oh, and the whole, like, why do you need to do something? Why do you need to do something to undo, for them to undo the things that were never true in the first place? Like, like that matters, because it's like, unless you join a church, we're not going to say that you abandon your marriage vows. That's wild to me. It's like, nah, go up there and fix that. You should that should have been your reaction to me.
Right.
Is, dang, you're still not at a church. We really love that, sister, but there's a lot of stuff that we didn't realize, whether we had the information or not. It's now clear. We gonna fix that, because you're walking around with a banner over your head that's untrue of your life. And we caused that. Like, whether it's locally the church, whether it's because it's on Facebook Live and everybody knows, like, the context we gave and the reality that is true is not consistent. We need to fix that. That should have been a knee-jerk reaction to me. It bothered me that it wasn't. And so, yeah, like, we end up basically getting to the point where we put it back in their hands to essentially present something. And they do, I guess we'll have a video on that, but yeah, they present basically a really quick snippet of, like, that doesn't really, I don't, it bothers me how quick that was. Like, it doesn't do anything because it protects them, and it doesn't give any context to what they said. It just says it clears their name, but she's still not in the church. And it's like, clears her name of what? Like, I guess everything else. Like, why not at least say those things? Like, there's a lot missing.
That's going to be the next video.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
I won't do
let's
that.
save that.
But I did want to say, so I guess the reason I'm saying it is because, like, it's important, I guess, to know, like, I guess because you say, like, the steps we went through too, like, to go have that meeting. Like we came out there, we didn't bring anything up to the congregation. We went there, had a private conversation. We wanted there to be women and male leaders there so that, like, the perspective of a woman would be had, but or listened to, but they, like, requested that it be only the elders, which happen to be men. I don't know if it's a happen to be men or have to be men, but
They have to be.
Okay.
That's only a position for men.
Okay. And I could see
for them.
I could see how they got there. Yeah. Like, I don't necessarily have a problem with that, but I do have a problem with having an explicitly female issue, not using the wisdom of the women in the church. Even if the elder role is one thing, like, so I feel like just who they chose also, I feel like, is a problem. And the fact that it's like, we did give them a chance and they kind of came up with that, and it's just not satisfying, honestly. And so I do feel like, yeah, like, 1 Timothy, 5:19, it says, do not admit a charge against an elder against the evidence, except on evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. And so I think, like, even biblically, like, that is the principle that we're going by, is, like, this is now being presented to the church because we've tried to do this the other way. And now it's like, okay, like, there's 3 witnesses here and we can all attest to it. And there's a recording. Like, I'm not, I guess maybe for the church, this is important. Like, the objective isn't remove them from ministry, destroy them, yada, yada, yada. But it's like, hold accountable what you've now seen and assess within the body how much this is happening. Because to ignore this, because that's true of it, you know, like, it says, when you're holding someone accountable, bring them before the church, like, not the elders, it's the entire church. And so it's like, as a church, there is also a responsibility. And I know RCLA holds to this, but it's like, to hold people accountable once you know. Like, if you didn't know, that's one thing, but yeah.
Can you finish that scripture you just read in 1 Timothy 5, I believe? Because if you actually go all the way down, I think it'll further, just for scriptural backing, I think what it says next further aligns with what we are doing. I think it's just keep going, just for the sake. Yeah.
You want me to actually, just keep reading. So 2 or 3 witnesses. As for those who persist in sin, rebuke them in the presence of all, so that the rest may stand in fear. In the presence of God and of Christ Jesus and the elect angels, I charge you to keep these rules without prejudging. Do nothing from partiality. Do not be hasty in the laying on of hands, nor take part in the sins of others. Keep yourself pure. Okay. I mean,
because that's exactly what we're doing. Like, you know, it's like, if they persist, that very next verse after verse 5, where it says, if they persist in sin, then basically bring it before everybody. Because it's like, if you have elders or your pastor, someone who is in a leadership role that you're supposed to be not submitting to, but, you know, supposed to be your willingly submission, you know, but it's like, it's like if they're in the wrong, I feel like this is a problem within the church as well, where there's a fear of, well, that's a leader. That's a Joel Osteen, or that's a TD Jakes, or whoever's a big name pastor, or even if it's not big name, it could be your little small church, but the pastor's the authority there. And the leadership is just, you don't feel like I can say something if they
can't hold them accountable.
And it's like, no, like this is literally, you have grounds and a way to actually go about doing this, which is why I think it's wise where it says to do it if there are multiple witnesses, because it's just like, yeah, like you're a witness, I'm a witness, Timothy's now in on it and a witness, the therapist was a witness. It's like you have multiple people who knew what was going on. And I think because we even had the meeting properly, and they persisted in not doing the right thing, it's like, okay, well, you know what, now we are going to bring it before everybody. And it said, so that others may be, what did it say? So others may be like in fear or whatever. And I like that part that says like not to do, what does it say about partiality or something?
Partiality, yeah. So in the presence of God and of Christ, and the elect angels, I charge you to keep rules without prejudging and do nothing from partiality. So yeah, don't wear favoritism as you try to do this, but judge it as though there were no name tags. Like it's like person A did this to person B, and you know what I mean? Because that's essentially what Nathaniel would have had to do to David. And we're not on that level. Like ain't nobody kill nobody, but it's like there's a sense in where it's like he had to show no partiality. He said, David, let me give you a hypothetical story about a man who stole a sheep from another man. And David, by the end of it, is furious. But it's like if Nathaniel doesn't hold him accountable without partiality, he could say how much good things David has done, how he remembers like, the wars he fought or the people he saved or how he put him in this position. But it's like, nah, on this particular instance, this is sin, this is error, this is wrong. And I would be wrong to start weighing your righteous acts against your wicked ones before I approached you about wickedness. I have to say things when they come up. Like, and so, yeah, that's important. So,
yeah.
I'm glad that was covered, just how we just discussed this whole thing of addressing an elder, just because viewers could have that, that belief that this is not appropriate. I think this kind of clears the air with that.
For sure.
Yeah, not just clears the air, but like this is as much a command as anything else. Like this isn't it's a good idea to challenge elders if you have the nerve. Like there's a responsibility, to that, So so no, I think there is a real, unless I'm misreading that verse, but I don't see anything about it that's a suggestion. Like yeah. So anyway, yeah, I think that covers for the most part everything that's going on. And I do still think there's a heart that wants this to be addressed properly. Like I really do think that's just all it is at no point does anything seem like it was done properly. You were excommunicated without context, you were restored with less context, and everything in between was like pulling teeth to try to make something happen. So
yeah,